again, Jesus has torqued off the religious authorities. This time it's the scribes and the Pharisees, but they weren't alone. All throughout his ministry, he's a disappointment to them. Not doing what they expect, but instead going a completely different direction. And this time, he's crossed over another line. Eating and associating with tax collectors and sinners who were not only on the edge of the society, they were excluded from the religious community. And these are the very people that Jesus seeks out, eats with, and he associates with. There's an old Mexican proverb that goes, "Tell me with whom you go, and I'll tell you who you are." And that's the way they're looking at this. Who is this guy that's eating with these folks? He should be associating with us. We should be the ones that get to ask him questions. We should be the ones who are honored by his presence, but that's not what Jesus does. And so he tells what is one of the most familiar stories in the New Testament. The story of the prodigal son, which most people know at least something about. You have heard certainly dozens of times. It's one of those stories that is so familiar and popular that it finds its way into our culture. To be the prodigal son is to be the son who went away and messed up. Just like being a good Samaritan has to do with the parable of the Good Samaritan. In the story this morning, we have three different groups of people. Most of us refer to the story as the story of the prodigal son because that's the focus of the story, and because it's so easy for us to relate to that son. Because all of us, at some point in our lives, have made the same mistakes that he made bad decisions, thinking that they were a good thing. This young man believes that if he receives his inheritance now, he can go into another country, spend it, multiply it, make his fortune. But in so doing, he has to say to his father, "I wish and I will treat you as if you had died. And so give me my portion of the inheritance, probably about a quarter of the wealth of the family, and trust me, even though he's young and inexperienced." And his father remarkably agrees to this, knowing that this involves a broken relationship. So his son goes off into this other country and spends the money badly, makes poor decisions. I remember that point in my life when I was younger. In high school, college, in my early 20s, there were a number of decisions that I made that I wish I could take back. Things that I would now do very differently, and even worse, decisions that not only hurt me, but hurt my family and the people that I cared about. Those decisions are a burden for all of us. And yet, at the time, they looked like the right thing to do. That's the interesting thing about what we call sin. It always looks good at the time, otherwise you wouldn't do it. And that's exactly what this son does. He goes into this country only to find that he has made one foolish decision after another and squandered away all that he was given. Kind of like people that win the lottery and then later have to declare bankruptcy. So he decides that he will go back to his father. He can no longer go back as the son. He's ended that relationship, but maybe he can be treated as if he were an employee, as if he were a hired servant. Because not only has he lost and squandered everything, he's humiliated. He has to feed the pigs, which in the Jewish scheme of things were way down on the scale. And he wants to eat the food that the pigs eat. And if you've ever been around pigs, that's not a happy thought. So he just comes up with a plan. And I love the way Jesus put it there. When he came to himself. We use the same kind of language in our culture. When I am at my wit's end, I am beside myself. Or when I'm really crazy, I'm out of my mind. so this young man comes to himself, realizes who he is, realizes what he's done, and goes up with this idea. I'll go to my father, and I will beg him to be treated as if I were a hired hand. That's what he does. But things don't turn out the way he expects. The story, remember, though, is not told to Pharisees and scribes because they're the prodigal son. The story is being told to them because they're like the older brother. The older brother has a sense of entitlement and privilege. He's been a good kid. He has been faithful. He has honored his father and mother, not like this other brother that wanted to wish that they were dead. He has worked in the fields, and he expects a reward. And so when the younger brother comes back, instead of rejoicing, the older brother is jealous and wants none of it. All because the father receives the son and embraces him. Immediately, doesn't even wait till he gets to the front door. The father runs and meets him, which no mature man in first century Palestine did. If you run at something like this, you got to hike up your skirts and you look kind of ridiculous. Children ran, adults sauntered. And they maintained their dignity. But none of that happens with the father. As soon as he sees the son, he can't help himself. He runs and embraces him. And then says, let's put a robe on him. Let's put a ring on his finger. And most of all, let us have a feast, because this son has returned. And the father receives him. But the older brother wants none of it. In fact, the older brother refers to him as this son of yours, not even his own brother. And the father, in response, doesn't have any of that, says, this brother of yours was lost and is now found. This is part of a trilogy of parables that Jesus is telling about the lost coin, about the lost sheep, and now about the lost son. Because all of it is to teach us something about God's love for us, and about reconciliation. Because that's what happens. The Father receives the Son, reconciles immediately, embraces him, and loves him. Love is all about reconciliation. Because we all know what broken relationships are like. They're in our families, they're in our neighborhoods, they're in our communities, they're in our country. All too often, we too have had an experience of broken relationships. Sometimes broken relationships with God. And so Paul tells us we're about the ministry of reconciliation, because that's what Jesus was doing. Reconciling us to God, restoring us to relationship, bridging the gap. Notice in the story this morning, there's no retribution. The son doesn't have to do anything. He just has to show up. That's it. And the same thing I think is true with God. When we talk about that love of God that reconciles us to relationship with him and to one another. And so Paul says we're ambassadors of Christ, reconciling the world to God and reconciling people to each other. It's what we do. It's what we're called to do. Because we're the prodigal son too. We too have been reconciled to God. God calls us to share that, to embrace that, and to bring that reconciliation to others. Because love bears all things, hopes all things, endures